The reaction to the allegation of systemic racism is far more serious than the actual presence of systemic racism. That's what's going on here. Let's just take police, for example. You're right about these riots that took place in our streets for four consecutive months. A police officer, an individual police officer, was accused of murdering an individual named George Floyd. Nothing more, nothing less. But the media, the Democrats, and politicians have used this to further their own interests. The media does it for ratings. The politicians do it for votes. Because as long as you can convince 13% of the population, and that's the black population, that they are oppressed, that they're persecuted by the dastardly white man, whether it's Republicans, Donald Trump, or the police, they're going to get 95% or so of black people to march in there like lemmings and pull that lever for the Democratic Party. When you look at the numbers, it paints a very different picture. There are roughly 50 million civilian police interactions in America every year, and a population of around 350 million people. That results into 11 million arrests. 60,000 officers are assaulted every year. And last year, between 50 and 60 officers were killed by civilians. Out of all of that, the police kill, on average, according to the Washington Post, 1,000 people per year. 500 of them are white, 250 of them are black. So the police kill twice as many whites as they kill blacks, and the police kill more unarmed whites every year than they kill unarmed blacks. It's that the media does not care when an unarmed white person is killed, but when an unarmed black person is killed, they act as if it's some sort of referendum on the police. In fact, out of the 7,000 homicide victims last year, black, and that's 50% of the total homicide victims in America, out of 13% of the population come 50% of the homicide victims. That's roughly 7,000 black homicide victims last year. Out of that number, the number of black unarmed people killed by cops, 1/3 of 1%. Most blacks in America are killed by other blacks, just as most whites in America, when they're killed, are killed by other whites. It is a lie that the police are engaging in some sort of systemic racism against black people. It has been studied for decades. There's a very long piece in the Washington Post dated specifically April 27, 2016. I know that because that's my birthday, April 27, not the 2016 part. But a long article about the series of tests and interviews with officers going back over decades, showing, if anything, the police are more hesitant, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. There are a group of researchers from a university called Washington State University. They've done this experiment over decades, 3 different times, spaced over several years. Each time, same result. The cops are 3 times more hesitant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. The number one cause of preventable death for young whites in America is accidents, like car accidents. The number one cause of preventable death for young blacks in America is homicide. A young black man is 8 to 10 times more likely to be a victim of a homicide than a young white man. That's why the cops are there. It is an absolute lie that the police are engaging in systemic racism against blacks. And it's not just a harmless lie, it's a dangerous lie, because what happens is the police pull back when they're victims of these false accusations. It's called the Ferguson effect, and now it's called the George Floyd effect, where every time one of these high-profile shootings take place and the cops are falsely accused of engaging in systemic racism, the police pull back and they just respond to radio calls. They don't drive around looking to be proactive. Why should they? They're going to put themselves in the middle of something. They could be accused of racism, so to hell with it. Crime goes up. Bad guys know it. They're out in the streets. And what happens is young black men are coached, trained to believe that the police are out to get them. So when you're pulled over and you're a young black man, instead of it being just an ordinary police stop, it escalates into something far more serious, because you don't believe that the officer is there to protect and serve. You believe that the officer is an enemy. So what you're doing is training young black people not to cooperate, and therefore these incidents escalate into something far more deadly. Virtually every one of these incidents, guys, whether it's Eric Gardner in New York, or Michael Brown in Ferguson, or George Floyd in Minneapolis, or Jacob Blake in Atlanta, virtually every one of these things would have been avoided had the young black men simply complied. And if they felt that they were mistreated, get a name, get a badge number, and resolve it later on. Instead, the so-called leaders, including Joe Biden, are throwing gasoline on all of this by lying about what the police are doing and making things far, far worse. So the reaction to the allegation of systemic racism, gentlemen, is far, far worse than the actual presence of systemic racism.